Welcome to the MSP Dispatch live show for 5/15/2024. And I got to bring up my sharing of the screen because there's, just a couple news articles. It's only like a couple things that happened between the last time I did this show. We're going to keep trying to do this the same cadence every 2 weeks because that seems reasonable enough. But boy, there is a lot to talk about in this. Uh, some of the fun things here. Share my screen. We are doing this live, and for some reason it says I can't share my screen. There we go. All right, now we got it. How an empty S3 bucket can make your AWS bill explode. And you can probably guess how someone figured this out. This is really clever. And the good news is the S3 team is working on a fix. This is pretty decent article here. So a developer created a bucket, and just like you do, but there's nothing in the bucket. So there's no problems. This is not a security breach talk. This is, hey, did you know that if people, and they got it highlighted here, that if you go through and just go hit this AWS bucket, you just try to copy and you get an access denied, 404 here, you can't access this. The S requests without specified region will use default US East 1 and are redirected as needed, and the bucket's owner pays for that extra redirect request. This is actually pretty wild. The fact that your S3 unauthorized request charges are going to bill you. Now, if you're wondering how with that random bucket name this happened, it is a weird name collision coincidence. Essentially, there's an open source tool which he left unnamed for some security reasons that I go further in this article. Basically, someone had used this as a placeholder and a tool that backs up to AWS buckets. Then he registered this AWS bucket and it had the same numbers. So we have a name collision. And then, of course, there's no settings quite like the default settings. I actually like the term the tyranny of the default, because the challenge becomes who changes the defaults. If you're not using this tool for that, you're like, oh, I'll just leave it in there and I will set the tool up later while it keeps banging away at that bucket, and started costing $1,300 a day. So yeah, it was a kind of a wild ride to read this, and it's kind of an unexpected when you're like, wait a minute, there's suddenly 54 million requests and these redirected requests that came from the EU Ireland. And yeah, it turns out this open source tool turned out to be very popular and installed by a lot of people, but of course left at default. Yeah, it's kind of a problem. Hopefully this is something they get addressed, because I can imagine if somehow someone figured out your bucket, not from a security standpoint problem, but from an annoyance standpoint, if you DDoS someone's bucket, that means they will get the bill for it. Yeah, that just sucks. So thank you, Amazon, for hopefully fixing this, and this guy for raising some attention to it, because this story was a pretty interesting article. Moving on to, do you have cloud backups? This is kind of a challenge here. The problem is we assume, or I shouldn't say I'm talking to a technical audience here. We know that the cloud is someone else's computer, and sometimes someone else's computer, even if it's Google's computers, you can have quite the lesson learned. And this is a huge, this is an article over in the Guardian, but I pulled up the Reddit one because I think the Reddit discussion is a little bit better. And the fact that this is got a stupid paywall behind it. But Google Cloud accidentally deletes Unisuper's online account due to unprecedented misconfiguration. I actually like that Google called it unprecedented misconfiguration on their part, because I think that's a way better terminology than it only affected a small number of customers. Because that's usually what you say when there's a cloud incident, because Google had some incident where under certain configurations earlier this year, you could lose certain files in Drive. It was kind of a weird problem, but this one's different because this is someone losing their paid for. And this is, I think someone pointed out that this pension fund company manages like $100 billion. They're not some small pension fund. They're huge. But Unisuper was able to eventually restore because the fund had a backup in place with another provider. That is some forward thinking. Now, that is impressive amount of cybersecurity company or cyber team inside this company being able to pull that off. This is one of those, hey, hats off to them for going, hey, what if Google could accidentally, under unprecedented circumstances, delete everything we did? How would that play out? And someone actually put the risk management. And of course, that's what these retirement funds aren't they? Risk mitigations. You put your retirement in there. Well, they mitigated this risk as well of losing all their data. I thought it was just a really interesting thing to think about, the fact that Google could lose everything for someone. And if you don't have backups, then what? If you've put all your eggs in one giant cloud bucket and you don't have a copy of it, we even encourage, and as probably many of you do, in backing up things locally. So if you keep it in the cloud, having a local backup's great. If you depend on things local, we put it in the cloud. This is one easy, relatively affordable way to do it. But there's also the option for multi-cloud backup as well. I just want to put this on everyone's radar because you could be part of a unprecedented misconfiguration. And my other question that we'll never know the answer to: has this happened before to some small company that couldn't make noise? Is what really it pulls confidence down a lot for people who store things in there, because obviously a company at this scale gets to make a lot of noise and make a lot of rattling in the news. But what if it happened to a small company? Would we know? I'm not sure. So we'll leave it there on that. Next story is the shoving down our throats of AI. We'll just call it that. Now, I don't think, other than some investors losing money, when we've seen the failure of some of the recent AI products like the Rabbit AI, and I can't even remember the other one that was that MKBHD, the controversy wasn't just how bad the product was. The controversy was just how bad the reviews were on some of these products. And I'm not saying AI is bad. I'm just saying finding use cases for it that don't make sense, because there's money in them there hills kind of thing, is not great. And this is where it gets reckless. Instead of, which by the way, if you haven't looked at the Rabbit AI, one of my friends had it, and I'm completely hate it because it won't recognize me. It just calls me some middle-aged guy. I should post that video somewhere. My friend sent it to me of how bad it is at recognizing things. Anyways, that also applies to where it gets a little bit more serious. Is nurses say hospital adoption of hack-hooked AI is reckless. And this is not, and they preface this. There's actually an article that the nurses consortium wrote the whole thing on here. It's interesting because they're first saying out, no, we don't hate technology, but this isn't useful. Someone got sold a bill of goods that was actually a dud. And I agree, there's a lot of uses for AI, but the uses that these companies have now come up with and then sold to hospital executives, and then of course the people that have to actually use it are going, this tool doesn't work. And so there's good read right up on here some of the shortcomings and some of the problems with it. And as I said, this is just another companies just trying to force you into things that you don't necessarily need, or people just trying to monetize it. And I don't think that's necessarily the best idea. So that was a good article over here on Tech Dirt. Moving on to 68 tech companies. They pledge secure by design. Now, I actually am not negative at all about CISA. I think they're doing a good job in at least getting people to do some handshakes and say, we're going to do things securely. It gets the conversation going. So I'm not here to take digs at it, but the biggest names in tech are finally going to do security. Are they? Uh, the, I like the pledge. And I guess it's one more talking point when you pull these people in front of Congress, go, hey, you remember when you said up there at RSA and shook hands with fancy people going, we're going to secure things, and then you chose not to? I mean, there are some pledged things in here. Reduce default password use across their products. Increase the use of multi-factor authentication across their products. Reduce one or more entire classes of vulnerabilities. This one's a weird one to me. How do you measure that metric? We're going to stop, Google's moving a lot of things to Rust. So it's a memory safe language, as we like to preach. And the problem comes down to, cool, we solved maybe some out of bounds problems and some of the common problems we run into with coding, but I don't know. It's so I love where they're going in terms of like the big arching thought. And I guess that's where these conversations start. And I'm maybe a old tech vet, been in this industry too long, so I'm a little pessimistic at time. But hopefully they do all the things they say. Increase the installation of security patches by customers. Forcing it is probably how they're going to do it, for better or worse. Mostly for worse because they aren't doing a good job, but for better because they're doing it. The patching, the essentially forced patching, and all the jokes around it with Microsoft's products, in the big picture, I think make it better. I just wish, and we'll get to those stories in a minute, they would just validate their patching better so people wouldn't try to find ways to stop the patching from happening. People's hesitance to patch is not because they don't want the latest, newest, greatest, and best security patches. It's because of the next few articles we'll be mentioning down the road about what breaks when we patch things. And that's where the problem is. It's not that we don't want to patch. We don't want to disrupt work. Publish a vulnerability disclosure policy that authorizes testing of members of the public on products, commits to not recommending pursuing legal action against anyone engaging in good faith efforts to follow the VDP. I think this has been something that's a massive change. If you're a nerd of hacker history like I am, or you want to read one of the great books on this is the Cult of the Dead Cow book, kind of history of that whole hacking group. It's a wild ride that starts quite a long time ago, but in that wild ride, they cover just how hard it was dealing with companies when you knew there was a problem. There was no clear path. You had to keep yourself relatively anonymous. You faced legal action for telling them they had flaws, and that's just really difficult because you don't want to report them, and then you end up going the other way. And yeah, you look up the history of it is called this, the back orifice, and it was a fun hacking tool for Microsoft, and it exploited lots of features in Microsoft. Well, we'll call them features because Microsoft not wanting to fix them, I mean, they weren't bugs, they were features. So yes, we've come a long way in that. That at least is a status we have that is much better today. Demonstrate transparency in vulnerability reporting. This is something that there's been a lot of talk about, especially around the bug bounty programs. The bug bounty programs are sometimes referred to as the I'm going to give you money to shut up programs. And it kind of becomes a double-edged sword here. Cool, we want to have a bug bounty program that makes us look good. And so everything's great. The double edge is cool. I'm a security researcher. I'm going to get my $10,000 for the bug. But then you told me to shut up and then you never patched it. And the agreement says it has to be, I can't talk about it until you patched it, and you've decided not to patch it, but you've now bought the bug from me and you've told me to shut up. This has happened a few times. It's not necessarily all these big companies doing it. Sometimes it might be some smaller ones, but I'm hoping that no matter what, these have timers on them. So the person who submitted the bug, I believe some of the wording has been changed in some of the bug bounty programs to say there's a countdown timer. You paid them, the bug bounty's done. They have so many days to fix it, and then it goes public no matter what. And I think that's a better. So there's some timers put on this. I mean, timers can be extended if it's a really complicated fundamental flaw in the product, and we don't really want that information out there. But still, there has to be some type of balance met there. Make it easier for customers to spot evidence of intrusions affecting your product. I feel like this is a shot right at Microsoft called security is not an upsell. Logging. Matter of fact, if you one of the things in that previous article was getting the logs out of your AWS to figure out why your bill's so high. That also requires turning on more features to track some of that. And a lot of these companies, they upsell the tracking or data collection information. I mean, granted, there's a cost to it, but hey, security is an upsell. Sounds like a good upsell. And seeing as you offer it as a component, it looks like your product is cheaper until we start using it. And Microsoft, like I said, is notorious for doing this. This was some issues that came up before where people didn't have visibility into certain attacks unless they bought the higher tier that came with logging of such attacks. So like I said, I see a lot of good here in terms of intention. I just don't know how it's going to play out in reality. Now, same thing here, a lot of good intention, and there's some varying efficacy of this, but Colorado passes its third right to repair bill. We're seeing a lot of progress move forward. Groups and people like us and the technical community has actually been really great because it's pretty unanimous. We all want the right to repair. There's not anyone in the technical community that I have met among my peers that say, oh, no, I think companies should lock these things, screw them down tight, never let me see what's inside of them. So we are seeing a really big really big push across all the states. Now, I'd love to see, and this is generally how it works here in the US, where we're going to see a group of states do it, and then they start moving towards a federal bill. So it kind of goes, okay, enough states have come up with this. Let's just make it a mandate across the board here that this is how things are done. Sorry, Apple, you don't get to be really proprietary and lock things down. Apple's obviously fought this tooth and nail all the way. So this is good. We're seeing a lot of movement in that way. And I like that's a good feel-good story to me to see that there's progress being made. So it's not me just ranting about negative problems in security. Speaking of negative problems in security, oh man. So I really love, if you don't know who Kevin Beaumont is, also tweets as Gossi the dog, longtime follower. His articles are not just well written, they have lots of memes to help describe things. Move fast and get a CRSB report is essentially, yes, the Cybersecurity Safety Review Board smacked Microsoft going, you guys are doing a poor job. Now, what they're doing a poor job on isn't what they're doing today. They're in trouble for that in a few articles down, but this is what they were doing previously, and they're not doing a great job, and they got a bad kicking, and they deserved it. And if you really break this down, and before I go into a couple points in this article, one of the things I want to point out is I get it. You're a giant target. You're a critical piece of infrastructure to pretty much every company and all the people listening to this. Microsoft is a player that you can't ignore in the marketplace, but neither is Google and neither is AWS. You can't ignore them either. And they're not in the news every other day for nation state actors grabbing their signing key. Yes, their signing key. And this is talking about Satya Nadella's latest "We're Going" security. And because Kevin Beaumont is a former Microsoft security person, and he breaks down just, he thinks what's good, what's bad. He gives a very practical look and reads between the lines because he's an insider who talks about the pillars of protecting these networks, protecting the systems. And we're going to have to see, wait and see, will this happen? Where is this going to go with Microsoft? Will they actually put efforts towards it? It's not, when Microsoft says we don't have the resources of things, that's just the resources are going, yeah, the investors don't see the value in us doing it because we're not going to lose customers over it. Well, now that they're getting in more trouble, yeah, when government reports start coming out, you're going to see it's a really good response, which high level grapples with a whole bunch of problems I saw in Microsoft. And this is Kevin Beaumont's talk. Truthfully, the problems I saw at Microsoft extend way beyond what is known, and I don't want to document them publicly. Frankly, they appear to know parts of the barn are in fact on fire. So Microsoft's addressing this. If you follow Wiz Security, who recently got a really big evaluation, they've just beat Microsoft to death, and it's been great to watch because Wiz is staffed with a bunch of other former Microsoft people that know which barns are on fire and know where all the bodies are buried. So they've had fun poking at some of the big problems with Azure and all the technical debt. So yes, Azure might be new, but it carries a lot of technical debt for the way they engineered it, and no one wants to spend that time refactoring the code. So this is a good write-up that there's some positivity, but there's also, like he said, they are recognizing the barns are on fire. And there's also some great memes in here. Consumer Outlook broke, reuse the 2016 cert forever. He breaks down some of the fun security. I love that he used chickens for everything. I don't really know why, but this is just fun. I just reading any of his blog posts are always hysterical to me. Now, speaking of that, this is wonder why they said this. And this is more recent news, but trust me, they knew it was coming. This is the Microsoft Brad Smith summoned by Homeland Security Committee over cascade of InfoSec failures. I like that it used cascade of InfoSec failures. The U.S. government wants to make Microsoft's Vice Chair, President Brad Smith, the latest tech figurehead to get field questions from a House committee. I love these. I like the watching. I know it's completely security theater, not actual security. And I like the fact that they run through and they get a grilling from the old people asking the tech guys questions. That's how I look at it. But there's some pleasure I take in watching them squirm in the chair for 2 hours. I don't know that it really does any good, but Microsoft certainly doesn't like being there. It's not good for press. And so that's why they knew this was coming, which is funny because the other story Kevin wrote was before that was announced. So, hey, cool. They're getting grilled again. This is just another happy story here that's finally coming around. Apple and Google launched cross-platform feature to detect unwanted Bluetooth tracking device. If you're not aware of what these are, Apple AirTags became really popular, and there's several other devices like this. Then it turned out that this was used here in my hometown of Detroit to track cars people wanted to steal. They go stick these tags somewhere in a vehicle. Then this kind of launched some going, hey, you should probably have some guards around that when there's AirTags that seem to be constantly with you that aren't yours. And Apple and Google, the biggest people and players in this market, said, yeah, we're going to let people know that you have an AirTag that's really close to you that you're not using. It seems to be where you are, but it's not yours. And I think that is just awesome that they're doing that. Tornado Cash. Yes. Dutch court sentences Tornado Cash founder to 5 years in prison for money laundering. This is one of those things where people think cryptocurrency is not traceable. Read the book Tracers in the Dark. You will have a completely different view of cryptocurrency and the criminals involved in it and everything else. It's not to say that cryptocurrency is bad, but it's certainly not anonymous. And for the next 5 years, this person can think about how not anonymous a system is that favors people who want to launder money through Tornado Cash. So this is actually more government efforts that are going to slow down ransomware, because I can't get people to use 2FA, but if I disrupt the flow of money, well, it makes it less worthwhile to steal the money and get those ransom from these companies. So absolutely good thing there that they're doing that. Microsoft patches 61 flaws, including 2 actively exploited 0 days. Patch Tuesday is always going to be fun. I'm not going to cover these in depth, but there's quite a few of these here that I think are definitely some good patches. A couple of them are related to the platform security feature bypass, which is the mark of trust, web mark of trust, I believe is what Microsoft calls that. And that was found under active exploitation. Microsoft fixes VPN caused by April Windows updates. Thanks. About 30 days later. So hopefully you're not using Windows VPN. If you wonder why it was breaking, this is why. This is one of those reasons why we're hesitant to patch, because what cool, I patched one security flaw and traded them for different problems. Moving over to the healthcare industry and the last 2 articles we have here. I can't believe it's taking this long, and the pushback is kind of funny. Nuremberg says backlash is unwarranted. So White House is going, hey, folks, seems to be a little dumpster fire going on over there. United Health shutting down payment for so many days. Ascension Healthcare, we don't know when they're coming back up. Ascension Healthcare operates in 19 states. While that's not as many states as United Healthcare, it's kind of going, well, you hit the big one, and now you're hitting another one. We should probably talk about what's going on in the barn fires that you have, and fix all this. But you got this big pushback going, we don't want to spend money on these things. And yeah, so there's going to be more congressional hearings, more people sitting in comfortable chairs. I so hope that same senator, who I forget his name, holds up that book that said Hacking for Dummies and then pointed at it while he, says, why don't you have MFA on things? I mean, hey, cool. We got Congress reading Hacking for Dummies. So they're going to have more fun with these executives who are building larger and larger targets and not particularly doing a great job of securing them. It's hard to secure them. I'm not going to say it's easy, but I'm going to say it's something that has to be done. We can't have our healthcare system partially going offline at random. It's just not something we're really looking forward to. So yeah, it's more stuff on there. Finally, this is going to be an exciting story for a lot of people. Is Veeam is announced that they are going to start supporting data freedom with Proxmox. So I've talked a lot about this in the past because I'm a big XCP-ng person, and I really hope they support it. Matter of fact, if you follow me on Twitter, I was just tweeting because I got pulled into a discussion with the CTO of Veeam, and I'm like, hey, DM me, let's talk, because he's asking what's next. Now, there is a push, and the team over at Vates is talking about putting it in XCP-ng. That's a forum discussion, but what is officially announced, because that's kind of the unofficial back channeling, Veeam extends support for Proxmox. So they're going to add this in there. They're recognizing that the destruction of VMware, if you will, with the small business communities and the MSP community means they're looking at alternatives. Proxmox and XCP-ng are, by far the 2 most popular alternatives out there. And this is good news for people who are using Proxmox, and probably good news for people who are looking at some of the other solutions as well, because if they're going to put it in Proxmox, they're probably going to wander over into a few others. So I really do welcome all of this. That is the last story I have for you folks today. There's not as many of you commenting in there, but definitely like and subscribe. Come join me for some more news. Feel free to tag me in any of the social tag the MSP Media Network and all the socials. Have a discussion over in Discord. Throw some stories at us if you're looking for a take on it. And in between these live streams every 2 weeks, hey, I love hearing from all of you. Love getting engaged and discussing with things. So let's end it there. So awesome. Thank you all for joining.
This has been a broadcast of the MSP Media Network.